Strategy Talk, where the editors and contributors of Strategy Page discuss current events and other military-related topics with a splash of history. I'm your host, Dan Masterson. Joining us today is Jim Dunnigan, editor of Strategy Page, well-known military author, and acknowledged pioneer and innovator in board war games. Also joining us today is Austin Bay, associate editor of Strategy Page, military author, columnist, and retired Colonel, U.S. Army Reserves.
Welcome, Austin and Jim. Of course, the big news right now is the coup in Russia. Jim, what do you think prompted this?
Well, it wasn't really a coup against Putin. Yevgeny, he said as much, that he really wanted to go after the henchmen, as it were, the generals and the Minister of Defense, whom he felt fed Putin incorrect information about invading Ukraine in the first place, and then mismanaging the fighting there to basically make it unwinnable. And now Putin disagrees with that, but what's he going to do? He thinks he needs Prigozhin because Prigozhin still has his mercenaries. Prigozhin's men were the most effective in Ukraine. So you don't want to compound any of the errors you're being accused of by getting rid of your most effective commander. It's hard to tell. It's the old riddle wrapped in an enigma, and all that nonsense about Russia. Who can explain what is actually going on there?
Austin, can you explain it?
Well, I can explain some things that were documented by cell phones observers, electronic intelligence, civilian satellites. There were at least two combat actions involving Wagner on one side and Russian forces inside Russia on the other side. Now, it seems taking over Rostov by works peaceful and mostly peaceful protest, and I guess you could say that at least in Rostov. But then when that column started up the highway towards Moscow, there was a fight that the various shot down at least, reports vary on there, 2 to 5 Russian aircraft. They also shot down, unclear where this occurred, a command and control aircraft that, carrying electronics and can be an airborne type headquarters. I haven't read any complete description of how that occurred. For all I know, maybe it was shot up on a airfield. So there were at least 2 small battles. The other thing that seems confirmed, as Jim says, an enigma that's wrapped in a most curious situation. But once they got on the highway, they didn't meet any serious opposition. There just wasn't any, apparently. And the only time they were turned around, and this is where you get into the critique from observers, analysts, Twitterites, that say it was all a conspiracy by Putin and Prigozhin, is that they turn around and go back, and Prigozhin is allowed to remain alive. The Wagner mercenaries had already been told that if they were going to continue, they were going to have to sign contracts and join the fight with the Russian army. That ticked Prigozhin off. It may have been one of the things that pushed him to decide he was going to launch this attack to, as Jim said, remove incompetent generals and senior Ministry of Defense officials that he regarded as incompetent. It's regarded also as undermining his Wagner forces efforts in Ukraine. And the president of Belarus was at least nominally the fellow who negotiated the deal so that Prigozhin could keep his life and then go into exile in Belarus and also bring some of the mercenaries with him. And the next thing, and I'm relying on wire service reports that for this, and wire service, Reuters, AFP, Agence France Presse, and the like, and a couple of things in the Wall Street Journal. And I will also add the Daily Mail, the British tabloid, which it's taking its reports mostly from wire service, but I'm convinced the Daily Mail has an MI6 contact, just like the London Times and the Telegraph do. So that there were going to be somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 Wagner mercenaries stationed in Belarus. And this is after we're being told that that Wagner is going to be absorbed into the Russian army. And when last heard from, the president of Belarus said that Prigozhin had gone to St. Petersburg, where he's from, to pick up some of his belongings, supposedly. But we also learned that the Russian security, domestic security, had raided his mansion in St. Petersburg and found gold and weapons and a lot of wigs. Dan, there were a number of wigs that apparently they're wigs for a bald man, and Prigozhin is bald. At least in most of the photos I've seen of him when he's out where he has his helmet off or a hat off. But the Russian press made a lot out of finding wigs at Prigozhin's mansion in St. Petersburg. So this is where we're left, is that most of Putin's opponents, if they're not immediately liquidated, sometime within the next 6 to 12 months, they fall off of a building someplace or suffer a terrible convulsion that usually is traced to poison. At the same time, it appears, and I think Jim was suggesting this, that Putin needs Prigozhin, and it needs his forces. They're not replaceable by, well, they could be replaceable, but the Russian would lose complete plausible deniability if they didn't have Wagner forces in the Central African Republic. One of the things they're involved in is stealing resources. And, that's diamonds, gold, also minerals, and not just from a car, but from other Central African nations as well. It's a form of power that Putin can exercise directly through Prigozhin. So, was it a fake? Parts of it aren't fake. It is peculiar that Prigozhin is still alive.
Yeah, he was supposed to have flown to St. Petersburg to check on his assets, maybe get some of them back. And then he flew back to Belarus. Now, he still has those 8,000 or so troops loyal to him. Whether or not they're going to get paid, remains to be seen. But they could make an attack on Ukraine straight from Belarus, which would take them very close to Kiev. Now, again, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen next, but that's how the scenario is shaping up. Putin is really running out of options. His invasion of Ukraine was apparently not working out as he intended. He's now insisting that he's going to keep at it, forever. He's going to basically outlast the NATO and the Ukrainians by never giving up. Of course, he's losing. I mean, the Ukrainian offensive is still rolling on. They're doing it methodically, and they continue to make progress. The Russian troops in Ukraine turned out are not resisting very stoutly, if at all, because some of them, well, a lot of them apparently, haven't been relieved in almost a year. So they've taken losses, normal losses in a combat zone. But they're basically their morale is rock bottom, which doesn't help. So Prigozhin is the only guy who could basically motivate people to put up a resistance. Otherwise, the Ukrainians are going to win. Now it's going to take them a while, but they're making progress. The Russians aren't. Putin is basically running out of money. He's running out of people who are willing to fight in Ukraine, and he's basically running out of support in Russia. Now, Russians are backing him because that's what you do. They admire a strong leader, be it Stalin or Tsar. And if there's any chance of progress, it's going to be leveraging this unthinking support from Russia to keep the war going. Eventually, that's going to run out of steam because, like I say, the Ukrainians are winning. NATO is continuing to support them and supply them. Putin tried any number of schemes to discourage NATO from continuing to pour billions of dollars in munitions and weapons to Ukraine. And, it's an endurance contest, which the Russians are losing at the moment.
Austin, what happens to all the...
Dan, I'll pick up on that.
Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah. I was going to say that I call attention to that. One of the posts we had in the last week about, I think it was under Jim's How to Make War, armor update about how the Ukrainian army is moving at a very deliberate and slow pace because of the obstacles, anti-tank mines, and the like. I used that, leveraged it for my column this week, but pointed out that one of the things, the one reason that it's slow and you're not seeing an armor breakthrough, classic type that you saw in Desert Storm or even in Operation Iraqi Freedom and the like, is no air power, no close air support or battlefield air interdiction, because the Ukrainians don't have an air force. And the West, I blame NATO, but it was the United States that stopped at least two, I think it may have been three other NATO members from transferring MiG-29s and some other older Russian type aircraft, or even some early model F-16s, because they were the Biden administration said we're concerned that Russia might react, Putin might react, and lead to a escalation to a larger war. But now that decision has been made. We discussed it a few strategy talks ago about getting F-16s. If you want to see the classic rapid armor mechanized infantry combined arms attack, you're going to have air support. Germans used close air support as very mobile artillery in the initial Blitzkrieg operations in Poland and in the Battle of France. And it's not myth what P-47s and Typhoons and P-51s did for Third Army when it was on its breakout from St. Lo, sweeping through France, which is the American Blitzkrieg, the Patton breakout. Ukraine doesn't have that. It's got drones that can do certain things and attack and take out, or at least suppress Russian defensive positions and knock out Russian vehicles when they're identified. But they don't have the robustness of what you see with a Air Force supporting a mechanized army. And that's one of the other reasons that Ukraine's having to proceed, and I'm using the word deliberately, very careful and be meticulous about it. And that particular update talks about how, mobility kills. That's what stops a rapid armor breakout, blow off the tracks. I recommend that particular post to all of the listeners if they haven't read it. And you can read my column this week that points out the other material about needing close air support.
One thing that stopped the Russians from using their superior aircraft superiority, they have more aircraft, is the effective anti-aircraft weapons we've sent to Ukraine. Now, the Russians have noted that these, mainly the NASAMS and the IRIS-T, which is a European version of NASAMS, these have been very effective in knocking down missiles, and they could obviously be effective against aircraft. Now, they have shot down some Russian aircraft inside of Russia, and that's basically, made the Russians even less eager to get into an air battle because, their aircraft are the ones going up against all the anti-aircraft systems inside of Ukraine. The Russian anti-aircraft systems have not been very numerous or effective when they were present, and the Russians are finding that out the hard way. That's basically valuable information if they intend to do any future wars. But the big problem is with Russia is they're poor. For example, they're trying to set up a aircraft manufacturing, a warplane manufacturing operation to produce 200 aircraft a year. They can't do it. I mean, they're trying, but they haven't got the resources. They haven't got access to key components. A lot of these have to come from the West. After the Cold War ended, Russia became very dependent on Russian American Western technology to produce their own equipment, not just military, but civilian equipment. And they're finding out that they really cannot build up a sufficient air force. Now, they've not tried to use they have more aircraft in theater than the Ukrainians do, but they have not used them inside Ukraine because of the anti-aircraft capabilities. They've already, like I mentioned, they already lost some that were hit within, Russia. They got too close, to the line, as it were, that was in range of the Western anti-aircraft units in Ukraine, and they were shot down. So that just reminded them of the disadvantage they're at. So the Russians are basically running out of options. They're not going to give up. They can afford to do that, but it's a wasting war. And if they do, eventually, like I say, it's going to hit the average Russian, which Putin has tried to avoid. Not too many drops in the standard of living, but he's got limited resources, and the more he spends in Ukraine, the less he's got to keep the poverty level low. As it increases, more Russians say, hey, this isn't worth the spit. Because Russians are aware, although they're patriotic, this is not World War II. It's not fighting off the Nazi invasion. It's the Ukrainians fighting off the Russian invasion. And the Russians aren't really used to being the bad guys like this. At least the average Russian is. And Putin is finding out it's not very advantageous for his military forces either. Because with that defensive advantage, like I said, with the anti-aircraft weapons, which are pouring in, as it were, to Ukraine, they cannot use their aircraft anywhere near Ukraine because they'll get shot down. And there's already been a demonstration of that. So it's a no-win situation for Putin, and it's an eventually win situation for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians aren't going to give up because it's their country they're trying to, regain. The Russians are trying to, Putin is trying to maintain his reputation as an intelligent and calculating and effective leader. Well, so far, he's not scoring very well at all.
Austin, what happens to the Wagner's group outside Russia?
Dan, that column I wrote right after this, right after it occurred, so that would be like now getting on 2 weeks ago. As I mentioned, Wagner's forces in Russia. I think I don't have that in the column, but this went through my mind at the time. They're going to keep this in some shape, form, or fashion. And they are not going to want who's the plausible deniability. What do? Well, they change the name. This was where I didn't know whether Prigozhin's going to live or die or whatever, how the organization is going to go. So I was saying, Hudson, a mercenary company, still a Wagner mercenary company. You change the name, and then Moscow can claim that it's different. And they're Russians, but they're trainers. That's what they claim they are in the Central African Republic, is they're trainers or they're security forces for assisting the CAR's government. So again, I may just keep it as the name of Wagner, but I don't see the Kremlin just removing it or penalizing the mercenaries that are doing their bidding. Now, it's criminal. A lot of what they're doing is absolutely criminal. But as a matter of fact, if there's an investigation, I read this, at least 3 months ago, and it was one of the sources was MINUSCA, which is the peacekeeping force in the Central African Republic. I don't know if it was an official report from MINUSCA. I don't believe it was, but it was that there were at least a half dozen Wagner mercenaries that should be charged with crimes against humanity and, rape, murder, torture in the Central African Republic. There may be more than that. As a matter of fact, I have read some Reuters and AFP reports about more war crimes being attributed to Wagner mercenaries, primarily in the Central African Republic. I wanted to add one other thing, since Prigozhin and Putin really are the subject of this strategy talk. That first column I wrote, I said, there are losers worldwide, and losers worldwide too would be could be some of the Wagner mercenary operations in Africa. But Jim's been talking about how Putin is weak. Well, I think this shows him to be a weakened leader. There's definitely political fragmentation. How significant, we don't know yet, but we're aware of it. And the Russian people are aware of it, that there are very severe disagreements within the defense ministry. It's not all personality-based. It's based on one of the things that Prigozhin got a lot of traction with politically was talking about not only just the incompetence, but the corruption. And Putin has overseen the corruption operation. It's Russia's started out corrupt after the end of the Cold War, and that hasn't changed. And you've seen how the corruption, we've seen how it has undermined the ability of the Russian army to defend Russia. With selling good tires, buying bad tires. There was reports on that from last year in the June, July of 2022. That was one of the reasons that so many of their convoys were breaking down. It wasn't just the Ukrainian drones. It's that they hadn't done basic maintenance on some of their on many of their vehicles, and they weren't up to a sustained operation of over 2 or 3 days. And why? Well, the motor oil got sold, the tires got sold, the parts got sold, and over what Prigozhin's gripe says is not only were my Wagner mercenaries sold out of the defense ministry, not support the supplies that we needed. And we're sitting there in Bakhmut taking the cash. You can see this throughout the entirety of the Russian military operation in Ukraine.
Yeah, one current example.
He named. I'm sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
one current example of that is Russia is raising new units, and it found out it hasn't got enough weapons to arm all the men in the unit. So some guys, this goes back to World War II, but some guys are basically, who are not actually in the combat units are going to be unarmed. They're basically told, pick up weapons if you have to, if the situation gets desperate. Well, so far, the Russian units have tended towards encountering, desperate situations. So it's gotten even more desperate. They can get uniforms, but they can't get weapons. They can't get ammunition, but they get orders to, keep on fighting. This does wonders for, sabotaging morale, and it's not the fault of the soldiers or their commanders, but of, the folks back in Moscow, where a lot of the stuff is being stolen. I mean, as Austin points out, the corruption is still there, and it's most harmful back in Moscow, where, basically money is appropriated, weapons are bought. Well, the money disappears, the weapons don't appear, and the troops, it's easier to raise troops than it is to get them weapons, and they're basically told, well, you can't get enough weapons for you. Also, you have to go with what we can manage to scrape together. This is not the how should I put it, the situation you would expect in a military force that expects to eventually prevail. The Ukrainians have some of those problems. They also had corruption, but they've managed to deal with it. They're defending their nation, and Zelensky has basically removed a number of senior officials. Well, they did early on. They've basically gotten the message now, for corruption, and he's acting, basically in support of Ukrainian independence, and that gets him a lot of clout, as it were, with the Ukrainians in general. Russia has no such, support from Putin. It's quite the opposite. Things are disappearing. Things aren't showing up. As I say, the Ukrainian offensive in Russia, in Ukraine, is basically benefiting from the fact that a lot of the Russian troops down there have been down there for too long. They're not getting ammunition. They're not getting any replacements. And this has been going on for some time. And the fact that they're trying to hold off the Ukrainian advances, it doesn't seem to make any difference. So you can see there's a big difference between the Ukrainian war effort and the Russian war effort.
Well, that's a good place to leave it.
Let me.
Do you have one more?
Well, let me pick up on one thing, Dan. Let me mention one thing. Yeah. This is Prigozhin is a criminal. He's a murderer. But where he gets his political traction in Russia is that he's right about what the corruption has done to the Russian war effort. And he's tried to shape it politically that it's not Putin he's after. So maybe that's why he's still alive, is that it was going after the incompetence in the Ministry of Defense. But as Jim points out, it's systemic, and Putin's overseen it. So Russia lost this one, Dan, in a lot of ways.
Well, I'm sure in the UK there are bookies taking bets on how long Prigozhin lasts. So we'll be talking about Russia some more in the future. Till next time, we'll see you. Bye.
Take care.
Bye, guys.